The sun was just beginning to rise over the dusty streets of Mogadishu, Somalia. The air was warm, carrying the faint scent of earth and incense from the nearby markets. Inside a small, humble church on the edge of the city, 12 faithful Christians had gathered. They came from different walks of life: farmers, teachers, children, and elders, but in that moment, their hearts beat as one. Their hands were lifted, voices whispered prayers, and eyes closed, seeking comfort in the presence of Jesus. The church was simple, made of stone walls and wooden benches. Sunlight filtered through small, dusty windows, creating golden streams that danced across the worn floor. Outside, the city stirred awake. Chickens clucked, merchants arranged their fruits, and distant car engines rumbled. But inside, there was only peace, or so it seemed. A young boy named Aon knelt beside his grandmother, clinging to her hand. He had never prayed so deeply before. "Please, Jesus," he whispered, "protect us. Be with us." His grandmother squeezed his hand and whispered back, "He always listens, my child." Around them, others prayed silently, hearts heavy with both hope and fear. For they lived in a city where danger was never far, where whispers of attacks and sudden violence were part of everyday life. Yet, here in the small church, there was safety, or at least, they hoped so. Suddenly, a faint noise broke through the quiet. At first, it was barely noticeable, a scraping sound against the walls. The worshippers paused, holding their breath. The noise grew louder, more deliberate. A shadow moved across the entrance, flickering in the golden morning light. The heart of the church seemed to hold its breath. An elder named Abdi stood up slowly, squinting at the door. His voice trembled slightly as he said, "Stay calm. Keep praying. Whatever happens, trust in Jesus." But even as he spoke, the sound of heavy boots hitting the stone floor filled the room. Panic tried to rise in the hearts of the 12 faithful, but their prayers remained steady, a fragile shield of hope. The attackers were here. They were armed, masked, and filled with anger. They had come to destroy, to spread fear, to silence faith. But as they pushed the doors open, a strange stillness fell over the church. The warm sunlight seemed to grow brighter, almost as if the walls themselves were glowing. The attackers froze for a moment, confused by the sudden shift in the air. Aeon's eyes widened. Something was different, something powerful. His grandmother whispered, "Jesus is here." And in that instant, fear began to collide with something stronger. Courage, hope, faith. The church, once quiet and fragile, now seemed alive with a presence that could not be touched. The 12 Christians prayed louder, voices rising together, trembling yet unbroken. Outside, the attackers struggled, as if invisible chains held them back. The sunlight grew warmer, almost like fire, yet without burning, comforting, protecting, impossible to fight against. Time slowed, hearts pounded. Outside threats seemed real, but inside, something unearthly began to happen. The faithful felt a courage they had never known. They felt love pushing away the fear. They felt a power, a presence, something beyond understanding, wrapping around them like a shield. And in that quiet moment, with danger pressing near, the first whisper of a miracle began to stir. The heavy wooden doors of the small church creaked under the force of the attackers. The 12 Christians, hearts pounding like drums in the silence, remained on their knees. The masked men entered with swords and sticks, their eyes full of anger and cruelty. The sunlight that had bathed the church flickered as dust swirled in the sudden chaos. Abdi, the elder, stood tall despite his trembling legs. He raised his hands and shouted, "Stay strong. Trust Jesus. He will not leave us." His voice, though small against the shouts and footsteps, carried a strange power. The attackers froze again, looking around as if something invisible was pressing down on them. The children clung to the adults. Aeon buried his face in his grandmother's shoulder, whispering prayers with all his tiny heart. "Jesus, save us, please save us." The words came out like sparks of hope in the thick, heavy air of fear. Suddenly, one of the attackers lunged toward Abdi, swinging a metal rod. But it didn't reach him. It stopped mid-air, as if held back by an invisible hand. The man stumbled backward, eyes wide, clutching his arm. Others tried to push forward, but the church seemed to resist. Every step they took felt heavier, every motion slower, as though the very air had become a shield. Inside, the Christians felt a warmth spread through them. It wasn't the sunlight anymore. It was something deeper, something they could feel in their bones. A power that was not their own. It wrapped around them like a cloak of protection. Fear still knocked at their hearts, but faith rose stronger. The attackers hissed in frustration. Their anger boiled, but they could not reach the 12. Aeon looked up and gasped. Before their eyes, the attackers began to freeze, not like statues, but their anger seemed to shrink, their movements clumsy, their voices weakening. The church hummed with an invisible energy, soft yet terrifying in its power. The Christians didn't understand how or why, but they knew, Jesus had come. Then, a sound like rushing wind filled the room, though no doors or windows had moved. Papers, dust, and light swirled around the attackers. One by one, their weapons fell to the ground. One man tried to lift his sword again, but it refused to rise. He screamed, confusion and fear twisting his voice. Abdi's voice rang out over the chaos, calm yet commanding. Jesus is stronger than any fear, any weapon, any evil. Pray, and he will protect us. The 12 Christians lifted their hands, and together their voices rose, joining as one, a single, unstoppable prayer. Outside, neighbors peered at the church, seeing strange lights and hearing sounds like thunder without clouds. Some turned away in fear. Some whispered prayers themselves. But inside, the 12 were no longer just victims. They were witnesses to something far greater than they could imagine. Time seemed to stretch. The attackers, though fully armed and furious, could not move past the invisible wall surrounding the faithful. The church was no longer just a building, it was a fortress of divine power. And in that moment, every heart in the room knew it, they were not alone. Aeon's grandmother whispered softly, tears streaming down her face, "He is here, my child. He is always here." And in that whisper, every fear began to dissolve. Every trembling heart felt a courage that could not be broken. The first wave of the attack had been stopped, not by strength of men, but by power unseen, power unstoppable, power that came from love itself. The attackers had stopped in their tracks, frozen by an invisible force, but their anger did not fade. They shouted, stomped, and swung at nothing, their frustration growing louder with every failed attempt. Inside, the 12 Christians remained on their knees, hands raised, voices trembling but unwavering. Each prayer was a spark, each whisper a shield, and the air inside the church seemed to hum with a power far greater than anything the attackers could understand. Aeon peeked from behind his grandmother and gasped. Before him, something extraordinary was happening. The sunlight streaming through the windows intensified, turning golden beams into a glowing barrier that seemed to stretch across the church walls. Dust and debris floated in the light, circling around the faithful as if drawn to them. The attackers stumbled as if the floor itself had turned to sticky sand, unable to reach the praying Christians. Abdi rose slightly, tears in his eyes, and spoke aloud, "Jesus, we trust in you. Protect us and let your power be known." At that moment, the church filled with a warmth that was both gentle and fierce. The 12 Christians felt an unshakable peace flood their hearts. Fear still lingered, but it could no longer control them. Their courage grew with every beat of their hearts, every prayer lifted. Suddenly, one of the attackers screamed. His weapon had slipped from his hands, and his feet could no longer support him. He fell to the ground, trembling and shouting, while the others began to stagger back, confused and frightened. It was as if invisible hands were guiding them, holding them at bay. The room seemed alive, protecting, shielding, defending. Aeon's grandmother whispered softly, "He is showing his power, my child. See, he is fighting for us." The boy's eyes widened. He had heard stories of miracles, but to witness one, to feel it, it was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The warmth, the light, the sense of protection, it all felt real, almost like Jesus himself was standing in the room, arms wide, shielding them from harm. The attackers tried to regroup, shouting threats and swinging their weapons again. But every motion was met with resistance. The church seemed to push back, holding them at bay. One of the men tried to grab Aeon's grandmother, but he stumbled and fell to the ground, unable to rise. Confusion turned into fear, and fear into panic. Then, as if responding to the prayers of the faithful, a sound like rushing water filled the room. It was soft, yet it seemed to flow through every corner of the church, touching hearts and calming souls. The attackers' shouts faltered. Their movements slowed. They looked around in terror, eyes wide, realizing that they were powerless against something far greater than their anger or weapons. Abdi stepped forward, his voice strong and unwavering. "This is the power of Jesus. No weapon formed against us will prevail. No evil can touch us while we trust in Him." The 12 Christians echoed his words in unison, their voices rising like a chorus of faith that filled every inch of the church. Outside, neighbors could see a golden light glowing through the windows, hear voices raised in unbreakable courage, and feel a presence that could not be explained. Some ran to join the prayers, others fell to their knees in awe. Inside, the 12 Christians felt it clearly. The power of Jesus was not just around them, it was within them, filling them with courage, peace, and unshakable faith. The attackers, overwhelmed by a force they could neither see nor fight, finally began to retreat. Their weapons clattered to the ground, their faces pale, and their anger replaced with terror. One by one, they fled the church, leaving behind an aura of confusion and fear, while the 12 faithful remained safe, protected by a power far greater than themselves. Aeon looked up at the glowing beams of light, heart racing with wonder. "Jesus, you really are here," he whispered. His grandmother hugged him tight. "Yes, my child, He is always here, always." For the 12 Christians, the miracle was undeniable. They had prayed with all their hearts, and Jesus had shown His power, not only protecting them but showing that faith could overcome even the most terrifying evil. And though the attackers had come with hate, they left with nothing but awe and fear, while the faithful emerged stronger, braver, and filled with a peace that could never be shaken. The attackers had fled, stumbling back into the streets of Mogadishu, leaving behind silence in the small church. The 12 Christians sat frozen for a moment, hearts still pounding, breaths coming in short, uneven gasps. Outside, the city carried on, unaware of the battle that had just been waged within the tiny stone walls. But inside, the air felt different, lighter, warmer, as if the presence of Jesus still lingered, wrapping them in His love and protection. Aeon's grandmother held him close, tears streaming down her face. "We are safe," she whispered. Jesus kept His promise. The boy's eyes shone with wonder. He had seen fear, felt it claw at his chest, but he had also felt something far stronger. A presence that could not be touched, a love that could not be broken. He realized in that moment that prayer was more powerful than any weapon, stronger than any fear. Abdi stood slowly, looking around at the faces of the faithful. Each one bore marks of terror, sweat on their brows, trembling hands, but also something else, awe. Awe at what they had witnessed, at what they had survived, and at the undeniable proof that Jesus had been with them every step of the way. "We have seen His power," Abdi said softly, voice steady. "We have felt it in our hearts. Let us never forget this day." The sunlight streamed through the windows once more, casting golden beams across the benches and floor. Dust floated in the air like tiny stars, sparkling in the light. The small church, once a simple building, now felt like a sacred place, hallowed by faith and protected by love. Aeon looked around, noticing every detail, the wooden beams, the stone walls, the flickering candles, and he realized something powerful. This church, these walls, and their faith had become a fortress no one could penetrate. Outside, some neighbors who had witnessed the strange events hesitated at the church door. Fear lingered in their eyes, but so did curiosity. Slowly, they approached, whispering questions and murmuring prayers of their own. They had seen the light, they had heard the voices, and they had felt the power. Even those who had not entered felt it touch their hearts. One of the young women, Fatima, knelt in the center of the church and began to sing a soft hymn. Her voice carried through the room, blending with the whispers of the 12 faithful. It was a song of gratitude, of praise, of relief. One by one, the others joined in, and soon the church rang with a melody of hope and unshakable faith. Cheers flowed freely, not just of fear, but of joy and wonder. Aeon's grandmother placed her hand on his head. "Remember this, my child. Remember that even in the darkest moment, Jesus is with you. He protects those who believe in Him. He listens, He loves, and He saves." The boy nodded, his heart full. He knew this day would remain in his memory forever, a day when faith had been tested, and when the power of Jesus had been shown in the most real, undeniable way. Abdi looked around the room one last time, a quiet smile on his face. "Today, we learned something important," he said. "Fear will always come, but with faith, we are never alone. Evil can try to touch us, but love is stronger. Prayer is stronger. Jesus is stronger." Outside, the sun climbed higher, scattering shadows across the city streets. The 12 Christians stepped out of their sanctuary, hearts lighter, courage renewed, and faces shining with hope. The city was dangerous, the world was uncertain, but they carried within them a secret power, a shield of faith and the knowledge that Jesus had walked with them, protected them, and would never leave them. And somewhere, deep in their hearts, they knew this was only the beginning of the story, the beginning of a life strengthened by faith, tested by fear, and redeemed by divine power. The sun had reached its peak, casting warm light over Mogadishu, yet the 12 Christians felt a glow far stronger than sunlight, an inner light of peace and courage. The church, once a place of fear and danger, now pulsed with life and hope. Each person felt the miracle that had unfolded, 12 hearts tested by terror, 12 lives touched by divine power. Aeon walked slowly through the church, touching the benches, the walls, the floor, as if trying to remember every detail. "Grandma," he whispered, "do you think it will happen again?" His grandmother knelt beside him, holding his hands in hers. "Fear may come, my child," she said softly, "but faith will always be stronger. Jesus is with us. He showed us today that nothing can harm those who trust him." Abdi, standing near the altar, looked out of the small windows at the bustling streets outside. His mind replayed every moment, the attackers frozen, their weapons falling, the glowing light surrounding the faithful. "We have seen a miracle," he said aloud, voice steady and clear. "Not just a protection of our bodies, but a strengthening of our spirits. Today, fear came to test us, but faith carried us through." The 12 Christians gathered in the center of the church, holding hands. Their voices lifted in song, a melody of gratitude and praise. Each note carried the weight of fear overcome, the relief of life preserved, and the joy of witnessing divine power firsthand. The church rang with sound, but also with something invisible, an energy of hope, love, and unshakable faith. Outside, some neighbors who had watched from a distance began to approach slowly. Their eyes were wide with wonder, their hearts touched by what they had seen. "What happened?" one whispered. "How could these people survive such danger?" Aeon's grandmother smiled gently. "Faith," she said. "Nothing else could protect us, only faith." The attackers had vanished, but their threat had left a lesson behind. Evil can try to strike, but it cannot break hearts rooted in trust and prayer. The 12 Christians had seen fear and felt its grip, but they had also felt courage beyond human understanding. They had felt Jesus' presence wrap around them like a shield, unyielding and powerful. Aeon looked up at the sunlight streaming through the windows. For the first time, he understood something he had never fully grasped before. Fear can be real, pain can be near, but faith is stronger than both. It is the invisible force that stands even when the world threatens to crumble. It is the light that shines in darkness. It is the power that protects, heals, and transforms. Abdi spoke one final time, voice calm but full of conviction. "Let us never forget today. Let us carry this lesson in our hearts. No matter the danger, no matter the darkness, Jesus' power is real. Prayer is real, faith is real, and with him, we are never alone." The 12 Christians left the church together, their footsteps steady, their hearts full, and their spirits unshaken. Mogadishu was still a city of challenges, but they carried within them a fortress no one could see, a fortress built not of stone, but of faith, courage, and divine protection. And as the sun shone brightly over the city, it reflected not just light, but hope. Aeon squeezed his grandmother's hand and whispered, "I will never forget this day. Jesus, he really is with us." She smiled, tears in her eyes, and said, "Neither will I, my child. Neither will I." The 12 Christians had survived, but more importantly, they had learned a truth that would stay with them forever. Faith can move mountains, protect hearts, and turn fear into courage. With Jesus, even the darkest moments shine with light. Summary: in war-torn Gaza, 10 Christians refused to deny their faith in Jesus. They were tied to a truck and set on fire, but instead of death, a miracle happened. The flames bent away, the ropes fell off, and they stood unharmed as a bright light filled the sky. Their survival shook the city. Even soldiers who once mocked them fell to their knees in awe. From that night onward, miracles began to spread. The sick were healed, the blind saw, and the hearts of many who once hated turned to love. The fire that was meant to destroy them became a light that awakened a whole city, and from Gaza, that light spread across nations, proving one eternal truth. Faith in Jesus cannot be burned, broken, or silenced. Moral lesson: true faith stands firm even in the fire. When all hope seems lost, Jesus stands beside those who believe. The power of God is not stopped by fear, fire, or persecution. Love and forgiveness can turn enemies into brothers. Miracles are not just signs of power, they are messages of love meant to awaken hearts. The end.